Well, hello, Friendship class. Hope everyone is having a good Christmas. It is Christmas Day here in the Craddock household. We had our Christmas last night. Uh, enjoyed watching everybody open gifts. We did not meet together. We did that through Zoom, and we were able to watch everyone open gifts on our computer, and that was good. All the way from Japan to Midlothian and Dallas and Waxahachie. But we've been in a good attitude. Our lesson last week was on joy, and I've had a trouble getting started on this lesson today. It is late in the afternoon, and I started early this morning trying to record it. But today's lesson's on anger, and I had to switch in my mind from a feeling of joy and happiness, thankful for God for sending His Son, Jesus Christ, to be born on this traditional day of His birth. But we're going to talk about anger. You know, our scriptures for each of these lessons is out of Psalms. And I've said before, and I believe it, that we can find a psalm that'll fit every need or every feeling that we have. Here's just some examples. Psalm 1, first one we come to, is a picture of right and wrong, good and bad, good behavior, destructive behavior. Psalms 8 is a psalm of admiration and adoration to God of our universe and what He did when He created. Psalms 51 guides us through confession as we use David's psalms when he confessed his sin with Bathsheba. Psalm 91 we looked at a couple of weeks ago is a good psalm when we're scared or have fear. It's known as the warrior psalm because it has a picture of security and protection. Psalms 100 is a great psalm of thanksgiving. And then Psalms 150 is a perfect example for praise. Well, we're in Psalms 35 today, and that psalm doesn't fit any of those categories. It falls in a group of psalms called imprecatory psalms. You know, I may have heard that word or read that word before that I started studying this lesson, but I don't recall it. Perhaps it's new to some of you as well. The root word for imprecatory is imprecate, which means to wish harm or to put a curse on someone or something. Psalms 35 is an imprecatory psalm because it's a prayer that invokes misfortune on one's enemy. There's approximately 28 such psalms out of the 150 that we have in the Bible, and about 23 of those 28 were written by David. It's thought that David was being chased by King Saul when he wrote Psalms 35. I'm going to read the first 3 verses, then switch over to verse 13 through 18. While I read this, see if you can detect David's anger. Plead my cause, O Lord, and with those who strive with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler, and stand up for my help. Also draw out the spear and stop those who pursue me. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled myself with fasting, and my prayer would return to my own heart. I paced about as though he were my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily as one who mourns for his mother. But in my adversity they rejoiced and gathered together. Attackers gathered against me, and I did not know it. They tore at me and did not cease. With ungodly mockers at feasts they gnashed at me with their teeth. Lord, how long will you look on? Rescue me from their destructions, my precious life from the lions. I will give you thanks in the great assembly. I will praise you among many people. You know, as you read this or listened to me, maybe you had the same thought as I did when David was praying for God to control his enemies, to wish them bad. I thought of another verse, perhaps you did too. Maybe Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount. Out of Matthew, he said, I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. So how do we reconcile a psalm that seeks misfortune on someone while at the same time ponder just what Jesus meant when he said, love your enemy? Well, to me it was apparent that David was angry over being harassed, chased, pursued, attacked, and in almost constant danger because of this enemy. We know from other sources that King Saul, as well as David's own son Absalom, was trying to kill David at one time or another. You know, that's enough to make a person angry. Can you blame David for praying such a prayer of protection? I did not have to go to Vietnam, but if I had been in the kind of danger where other men, some in our class, were trying to kill me, I'm sure I would have made a similar request of God. But we should remember that the enemies of David and the Israelites were enemies of God and his people. Many of those psalms were prayers to a God of compassion, asking for God's justice for the oppressed. The focus of David's prayer was not that God would prevail against the adversary and enemy of God as much or more so than as a personal opponent of David. David's actions on at least 2 occasions were to spare King Saul's life. What anger that David may have had was tempered by his devotion to God's chosen person to be king. When I was in the army and needed to salute a higher ranking officer that was not well liked, it was instead saluting the rank and the uniform rather than the person. Perhaps that was some of the thoughts that David may have had. So what about our anger? Turning this around to application and why we study things like this. We may need to read another psalm by David when he said, don't sin by letting anger control you. Think about it overnight and remain silent. Selah. You'll see that word, Selah, scattered around the book of Psalms. It means to pause and think calmly on what you just read. And what I read was a Psalm 4, where David said, think about it overnight and remain silent. I believe he is advising us when we find ourselves getting angry or already reached that point of anger to sleep on it before we say anything or take action, and thereby avoid letting our anger lead us to committing a sin. Paul quoted this same psalm and adds caution. In his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 4, he said, don't sin by letting anger control you. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. I think we would all agree that anger is a normal human emotion, reaction, response to some people or to some situations that occur in our life. Just about everyone gets angry at one time or another. So knowing this, how should we react when we feel that there are forces, people maybe, who mean us harm, either physically or by persecution and harassment? I believe in imprecatory prayer, as we talked about a few minutes ago, should be used as a last resort when appealing to God for justice. We need to realize that our personal adversary may not always be God's enemy. If we harbor ill feelings about someone and pray for their demise or misfortune, they also may be praying the same against us. Perhaps we need to hear the words of Jesus spoken to the crowd of men who were ready to stone the woman that they had just caught in an adulterous act. Jesus said, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first." And you know the story. They all turned and walked off because each had a sin. Well, how well are we at controlling our own temper? Due to the fact that Jesus was angry on a couple of occasions that we read about, I believe it's okay to become angry, but not let it lead us to sin. Not all of our enemies are people. That's what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 6, when he said, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand." So not all of our enemies are flesh and blood, people that we regard as someone we don't like or that they don't like us. It goes deeper than that, more important than that. Perhaps it's those forces that are leading those people to fight against us or to cause us misery. Maybe we should think about praying for the demise of those evil forces rather than the demise of those people. Let me suggest a more proper attitude, and that is to love our enemies like Jesus said, and to pray for God to destroy the evil forces around us, which in turn may result in controlling those who seek to harm us. How do you think Jesus reacted to Judas during those 3 years they traveled together, knowing what Judas would do at the end? He prayed for him from the beginning. Luke chapter 6 says he, talking about Jesus, went out to the mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12. Prayed all night that God his Father would lead him in choosing those 12. And I'm sure after he made that decision and got that word from God which of those followers he needed to choose, he prayed for each one of those 12. And from that first time, even to the last time they were together as one body in the upper room, when Jesus washed their feet as a symbol of humility and an attitude of being a servant. John records in chapter 13, says, Jesus poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel. See, he did not exclude Judas. That was before he sent him out to do what he felt like he needed to do. Was this one last chance that Jesus was giving Judas to change his mind? It may have been. And then in the garden, just prior to being arrested and taken to court and eventually crucified, Jesus prayed. In chapter 17 of John, John records Jesus' prayer in the garden. He prayed for us. He prayed for himself and God's glory, and he prayed for his disciples. In the 9th verse of John 17, I pray for them. I do not pray for the world, but for those whom you have given me, for they are yours. Still, at the last moment, praying for each of those 12 disciples, including Judas. And then as he hung on the cross, he prayed for those who were instrumental in leading to his death. From the cross, he said, when Luke records this in chapter 23, when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. If you take notes from these lessons that I record, you might get a pen and paper and write some of these things down that may help when we feel anger taking control, anger arising in our heart and mind. And before we let anger control us to the point of sin, maybe we need to jot these down and think about these. Keep them in our mind. First one, when the reason for being angry is selfishly motivated. In other words, why am I getting angry? Is it greed or lust or something that we want for ourselves and we're not getting it and we become angry? James 1:20 said, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And then the second one, when we are being angry, it's not glorifying God or defending his name. There's a way to do that. Anger may not be the best way. Paul said in 1 Corinthians, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. And that includes our emotions. And then the third one, when anger goes on for so long that it gives the devil a foothold in your heart. That's what said, the verse that I read previously. Don't let anger cause the devil to get a foothold, a step, a move toward us. And I'll read it again. Do not let the sun go down while we're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. The fourth step, or the fourth word of caution, when anger is so volatile that it begins to bring emotional or physical harm to others. That's really letting anger get out of control. Psalms 37:8. Stop being angry. Turn from your rage. Do not lose your temper. It only leads to harm. You've seen people get out of control, let their anger and temper cause others anger, either mental abuse, emotional abuse, or physical abuse. When anger causes us to hold grudges against people with the intent of making them suffer. Perhaps this is directed toward someone who has harmed us, spoken evil against us, and we take revenge rather than letting God work his own revenge. Paul said in Ephesians, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. That's tough. But I still think that's a goal that we need to work for. And then when anger makes us unwilling to forgive and consumed with revenge. And Paul said, be kind to each other, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Anger blocks all of these thoughts from our mind. Anger disrupts our forgiving attitude, and we need to get it back. Anger is dangerous. When we hold on so tightly to our anger that we begin to feel depressed and irritable, often erupting over small, insignificant things. Again, letting anger control our thoughts, our words, our actions, even against those who in our own household that we love. We may say things that are disruptive and hurting, all because of anger in our heart. The writer of Hebrews said, "Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many." Well, I think it's unfortunate that this lesson on anger comes at just a couple of days after celebrating Jesus Christ's birthday, when we need to remove anger from our heart and mind and our body. But it's still a good lesson to study, and as we move into a new year, to set our mind right and think about these steps. They're disruptive. Anger is disruptive. And as we go into the new year, keep these things in mind. I hope this spoke to you in some way. It did me after I studied it and realized that I've been angry for little reason, for no reason at all, when you consider the whole picture. It's not people, but it's evil forces that cause us anger. Hope you have a good New Year's. We'll see you next year.